Let me show you. These products for export. Due to the tariffs from yesterday, all the orders shipped overseas are stuck. On the same day, an employee from a factory in Jiangsu also posted images of an empty workshop.
Donald Trump's tariffs threaten to disrupt China's access to the U.S. market, potentially putting 20 million jobs at risk.
The trade storm of the century is straining ties between the world's two largest economies in an unprecedented way. On the one hand, Chinese businesses are reeling from the high tariffs announced by US President Donald Trump. And on the other, a wave of retaliation and a rising tide of tension that makes even the term trade war seem inadequate. Thresholds that were thought to have been crossed many times before are being pushed again in recent weeks with extremely harsh tariffs. Although this tug-of-war had previously erupted over items such as steel and soybeans, it has now expanded to cover almost all sectors. Ports and factories, the backbone of supply chains, have fallen strangely silent as the pace and scale of retaliation has escalated to a level that no one can cope with. In 2024, trade between the US and China was projected at over $650 billion. But a wave of tariffs in 2025 could paralyze much of this massive exchange. In fact, according to a media report headlined "China Faces 245% Trump Tariffs," the US administration is planning to impose or has already imposed new tariffs on Chinese imports, ranging from 145% to 245% on average. This is a punitive level that goes far beyond existing tariffs. Beijing was quick to retaliate against Trump's latest tariff package dubbed Independence Day. Raising its own tariffs to more than 125%, China also deployed its long-range sanctions weapon and launched an all-out mobilization, from aviation to rare earth exports. One of the first signs of this storm was the explosion of news about Boeing. In retaliation for Trump's tariffs, which could reach 145% or even 245%, China told airlines to put your Boeing orders on hold. Do not accept new deliveries. High tariffs dramatically increase the cost of commercial airplanes, and the move is a nightmare for Boeing because China is one of the fastest growing markets for the world's airline fleets. The Guardian reported that China's three largest airlines, Air China, China Eastern Airlines, and China Southern Airlines, had planned to take delivery of 45, 53, and 81 Boeing aircraft between 2025 and 2027, respectively. These deliveries are now in jeopardy. Similarly, Boeing shares fell 0.5% in midday trading after the Trump administration announced additional tariffs, according to reports, and the company is likely to lose confidence in the market. Migrant workers and small businesses in China will be the hardest hit in such chaos. NHK World's analysis, China's migrant workers face desperate times, explains that they have flocked from the countryside to the cities, but unemployment has skyrocketed as factories close or production slows. Company executives fear that if exports take a hit, their main source of income will close. Trump's plans for 145% tariffs have already put manufacturers selling goods to the US market in a difficult position, and the additional uncertainty created by the suspension of Boeing deliveries is even more demoralizing. Experts estimate that China's economy could face a major jolt, threatening the livelihoods of at least 30 million migrant workers. The BBC said, "It's very difficult. Trump's tariffs have brought Chinese small businesses to a standstill." The BBC reports that textiles, electronics assembly, and toy manufacturing businesses are unable to export to the US market. Thousands of factories from Shanghai to Guangdong are at increasing risk of shutting down due to back-to-back order cancellations. On the other hand, AP News' Chinese businesses ponder the future shows that everyone from big exporters to small family businesses is trying to figure out whether they should turn to other countries or return to the domestic market. But the domestic market is also grappling with problems such as cost increases and uncertain demand. China, which used to be the factory of the world, could be deeply shaken by this tariff war with the US. Global giants of supply chains such as Apple, Nike, HP, Dell may accelerate the shift to alternative production locations, Vietnam, India, or Mexico, for example. This is a threat that could complicate China's export-led growth model in the long run. The Business Standard and the Star's description of tariffs that will affect millions of Chinese workers and hit the economy confirms precisely this wider impact. According to their data, there are more than 290 million migrant workers in China's manufacturing sector. It is estimated that at least 10 to put 15% of them, 40 million people, work directly or indirectly in the production of goods for the US market. If tariffs remain at 145%, 245%, and US-China tensions do not ease, this huge mass of workers may face the risk of unemployment. With recent data showing that China's youth unemployment rate has recently exceeded 20%, an additional wave could lead to social unrest. Hong Kong Post's suspension of goods mail services to the US is also disrupting e-commerce shipments, a small but important part of trade. Consumers ordering goods to the US on eBay, AliExpress and similar platforms have started to face difficulties in getting them shipped. As tariffs jeopardize trade between China and the United States, Hong Kong Post's situation has become even more difficult. Industry experts say shipments from Chinese ports to the US are also slowing. RFA, Radio Free Asia, reported. Container volumes at the ports were around 290 million TEUs in 2024, down 13%, 15% in the first quarter of 2025. This cannot be attributed to tariffs alone, of course, but the trade war has played an undeniable role. It is also noteworthy that China has not limited its retaliation to Boeing or postal services. In rare earths, imposing an export cut on everyone is a nightmare for the tech world. High-performance magnets, special alloys used in semiconductor manufacturing, aircraft engines, and even renewable energy technologies all need these minerals. It's a serious concern. We're looking at it very closely, said Kevin Hassett, director of the US National Economic Council, implying that the White House is taking the issue seriously. But Beijing defends itself with the argument that export controls on rare earths are a normal measure for national security. On the other hand, as Fortune explains, if China, which accounts for more than 80% of the world's rare earth demand, plays this card, all global production could soon stumble. Instead of backing down despite the retaliation, Trump is escalating the situation by saying, "We are determined to fight tariffs, and if China doesn't deal, it will pay." China backed out of a huge Boeing deal, but that's just the beginning, Trump said as he unveiled the tariff package on what he called Independence Day. At the same time, he is trying to limit price increases in his own domestic market by exempting certain technology products from US imports. But the supply chain is so integrated that even some exemptions cannot fully address the ultimate crisis. If you try to corner us by imposing tariffs in coordination with your allies, we will use our leverage one after another, Beijing reiterates. So who are these developments hurting the most? It seems that both US manufacturers and Chinese small businesses are the losers. Boeing may be able to cut prices and campaign more aggressively to avoid losing market share to Airbus, but this will again reduce its profit margins. Factories in China will resort to laying off workers because they cannot sell the goods demanded by the US. Millions of working people are facing the question, our income has halved. Are we going back to our villages? Friction between the world's two largest economies will cause pain for all other countries, economists say, pointing to a slowdown in the global wheel of trade and a possible rise in inflation. Of course, the Chinese authorities have long-term plans to stimulate domestic consumption and reduce dependence on imports. But a sudden trade war and extraordinarily high tariffs could suddenly lead to a scenario in which hundreds of thousands of firms are strangled. Moreover, while the Boeing move or the rare earth cutback may reinforce the belief that we will bring the West to its knees, it risks alienating global investors from the Chinese market. A new retaliation could come at any time. Should we risk it? Some ask. This could pull Beijing's jobs and growth line down. On the other hand, one cannot ignore the fact that the US also suffers from excessively high tariffs. US farmers are again the first victim, as they have been with previous tariffs. China could impose tariffs on agricultural products such as soybeans and turn to buying from Russia or Brazil. Washington wants to subsidize these farmers, but this would put additional burdens on the US budget. Disrupting imports of rare earths could undermine US production capacity in sensitive areas such as chips and the defense sector. So there is a lose-lose situation, a lose-lose scenario. Despite this, both sides are refraining from making concessions in order not to appear weaker. Beyond tariffs, logistics is also under strain. Hong Kong Post's decision to shut down may seem small at the macro level, but it is a major blow to e-commerce players. According to Radio Free Asia, the slowdown or disruption of shipments from Chinese ports to the US will lead to empty shelves and jumping prices on both sides. In other words, the heat of the trade war is fully reflected in daily life. An American consumer might complain about inflation because he can't find cheap clothing or electronics. A Chinese laborer might lose his job. At a time like this, US allies like Japan or South Korea are also worried. Will China impose rare earth restrictions on us? The European Union worries we stood by the US, now Beijing is going to trip us up too? Reuters data shows that 80% of European car companies use Chinese lithium and rare earth magnets for EV batteries. These cutbacks may push the West to accelerate its own mining projects, but it is estimated that serious supply will not be realised before 3 to 5 years. This whole chain reaction ultimately raises the question, will the growing scale of the trade war in 2025 cause a tremor in the global economy? Some experts warn that even if China cancels its Boeing deals, it will not be able to fill the gap with Airbus or Comac, and airlines may have to cancel their flight plans because they cannot find planes. On the other hand, they analyse that if the US insists on the 245% tariff cap, we could witness the bankruptcy of many Chinese firms, and the ensuing social tension could provoke Beijing. The trade conflict makes diplomatic detente almost impossible, because Beijing believes that the United States has always used the weapon of sanctions and tariffs, and this time it is turning the same weapon back much more effectively. History has shown us that massive tariffs do no one any good in the long run, and that compromises are usually reached, some say. But this time it raises the question, could China's leverage, rare land, large domestic market, low-cost production be stronger than the US moves? Boeing may not go bankrupt, even if it loses market share, but it will have a prolonged nightmare. In the US, inflation could rise further as trade lines deteriorate. In China, unemployment could spike and recession looms if policies to stimulate domestic demand prove insufficient. Neither side is winning this trade war, but they are looking for a strategy to minimize their losses. After all, with its across-the-board export cuts and its order to halt Boeing orders, Beijing has shown what it can do when the tariffs reach the final stage. The Trump administration continues to wave the reciprocal tariff stick. Perhaps a deal will be on the table in late 2025 or early 2026. But until then, millions of workers and hundreds of thousands of businesses will struggle with uncertainty. Imbalances in shaken supply chains could spiral into price spikes, regional political tensions, and diplomatic escalations. In this picture, the two big economies would wear each other down like a camel wrestling match, leaving a wrecked global trading system. If things continue at this pace, the 2025 trade landscape could be shaped around two big blocks. One bloc, led by Washington, will pursue an industrial policy that excludes China, saying, "We are also developing our own rare earths and production lines," while the other bloc, attracted by Beijing's huge market appeal, will say Airbus instead of Boeing, LNG from other sources instead of the US, and continue with our own supply. Based on the Hong Kong Post incident, perhaps different logistics networks will be established, but their efficiency will remain low. In short, the rate of growth, innovation, and the blessings of globalization will fall behind in the entire world economy. This could kill the win-win logic of trade and turn it into a lose-lose tension. Although both sides say from time to time that they are open to negotiations, actual steps such as customs increases, Boeing cancellations, rare earth blockages, and the Hong Kong Post's boycott of the US make the diplomacy table seem far away. We have yet to see the real storm. Beijing may impose new barriers on Apple or Tesla, or the US may toughen its ban on Huawei, and tensions will continue to escalate, experts warn. In short, the claim that we are at a turning point where the trade war is evolving into the ultimate war cannot be dismissed. Yet, as in any conflict, interests may prevail and mediation channels may open. In the past, the US and China have backed down at the last minute from imposing extra tariffs. But this time, the axis is much broader. Aviation, rare earths, LNG, postal service, chip, and technology sector, agricultural products, etc. The fact that all areas of trade from A to Z are under tension makes it even more difficult to find a compromise. Policymakers need to recognize this reality and ask the question, how long can we hold out? To summarize the reality of the landscape right now, the US-China trade war has escalated from tit for tat to all-out retaliation from A to Z, and has widened from Boeing to rare earths, from logistics to all forms of energy, to the detriment of millions of workers and thousands of companies. Neither side is yet signaling a step back. Unless a diplomatic miracle happens soon, it looks like the whole world will pay the price of this war. Ordinary workers in factories, ports and cargo companies, entrepreneurs and consumers will be hit the hardest. Governments may raise funds through additional taxes and show of strength in the international arena, but the real economic burden will fall on much larger masses. How quickly and how this trade storm will blow over is anyone's guess.